Hello and welcome to episode 10 of the Get Psyched show. Today we are joined by Beth Macleod. Beth has an incredible depth of experience across the sports sector and now currently works as a leadership and business consultant. We chat about her early love for sport and growing up on the islands of Scotland before playing rugby internationally and the challenges that brought 30 years ago. We take a look at her time working in sports development and coach development before discussing the methods she uses nowadays to gain an insight into the performance of business and sports teams. There's plenty to take away from today's episode, so I hope you enjoy it. Thanks. Well, good afternoon, Beth. Thank you so much for joining me today. How are you keeping? How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you, George. Nice to see you too. Not seen you for a while.
Yeah, no, it's been a wee bit, but great to have you on and have a chat today, sort of all about your experiences, your career, and everything you've been involved in. So, I guess to start off with, could you give us sort of a brief introduction of your career so far, a bit of a background of how you've got into the roles you're in today, and yeah, just an idea for the listeners of what you do.
Yeah, great. So I played a lot of football and badminton growing up, and that's what was available. You're living in an island community, you have to go with the opportunities that are there. And then I also got the opportunity to start coaching youngsters, which led me to, wanting a career in sport. It's those PE teachers that rope you in and say, "Can you take this club for the primary school?" and get you hooked in from an early age. So I then went to Jordan Hill in Glasgow to study the BA in sport in the community because I wanted sport to be part of my career. And it's there where I bumped into rugby and started playing rugby for the first time. Which, as you know, I played for some great clubs and then was fortunate to go on and play for the national squad as well, which became a huge part of my life. From a work perspective, I worked in grassroots, everything from grassroots to performance sport. I worked in sports development. I was one of the first active schools managers, which is a massive network across Scotland now. I also had the opportunity to work for the Youth Sport Trust in London in the lead up to the 2012 Olympics, which was fantastic. And then I led the coach development team at Sport Scotland for the last 10 years, looking at coach development really rather than coach education, and leadership development. And then that was a natural progression into executive coaching and leadership and personal development, which is now what I run as my own business.
Amazing, thank you. So, yeah, you've given a really good overview of sort of your young journey and falling in love with sport, I guess, and then amazing experiences. I think the active schools set up within Scotland now is so well integrated and such a massive part of youth sport, and to be sort of involved with that from the start, you get a good idea of how it works. Additionally, that experience of playing internationally for Scotland, which although would be different to, I guess, how it is now for especially the women's game, you've still got that sort of top level experience, and joining all those things together is really useful. Just
Yeah.
going back, I know you mentioned and before when we've done a bit of work about your growing up on an island community. So can you just tell us what island was that, and how was that experience? Was it quite isolated, or were you still quite connected with things going on in the mainland?
No, it was pretty isolated from a sporting perspective. So it was the island of North Uist in the Western Isles. And we had a wonderful lady that took a badminton club in the village. And most people went. It was Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays. And this is where you start seeing how the crucial cog in sport is, the volunteers and the people run it. And then there was local football teams, but I had to play in a women's team. There was no girls' team. And all the competition was really in and around the island. So you maybe go on to a different island to play in different badminton competitions in the village halls and things like that. So it's better now. They come off island for a lot of competition. The athletics club is really big, and I follow them and see where they're competing in the nationals of the north of Scotland. And the inter-island games has been a big part of growing sport in the islands, for all of the islands in Scotland. So it was a fantastic place to grow up. However, there was limited sporting opportunities, if that was the things that you're interested in.
Yeah, no, it's just interesting to know, and obviously it has sort of evolved a bit now. I know sort of through family connections that the island games, I'm not sure if it's all the Scottish islands, but specifically around the United Kingdom, but sort of Shetland, Orkney, Isle of Man, Jersey, Guernsey, they have their sort of inter-island games, and it's such a good way to be able to compete and represent your island, and you've all got that sort of same common theme of being from a small island community. From, I guess, moving away and as you said, going to Jordan Hill in Glasgow to further your education in sports development, and that's where you picked up rugby. When you sort of made that move, when you moved to a big city, how did you cope with that? Were you just sort of full feet in first, let's fully go for it, or did it take you time to sort of develop and understand the differences in the way of life?
Good question. I've not really thought much about it. I mean, there was you come off the island with your sort of peer group, your year group. You all go and do different courses, but you remain with those connections. There's a strong island hub in and around Glasgow for different social events and things. But it was a bit of a steep learning curve. Motorway driving, the big city, all those sorts of things. But we'd spent quite a lot of time on the mainland for holidays and things with our family. But so many different opportunities to get stuck into. But the different types of sports that we had the opportunity to try in that, particularly in that first year of university, was great. It was enlightening almost, with all the different activities that you could get stuck into and see the opportunities that were available.
Yeah, awesome. And as you said, that's where you picked up rugby and you started playing that for the first time. So could you go into a bit more detail about how you got involved, and then I guess the future opportunities that came with that, and maybe some of the clubs you played with as a result?
Yeah. So there was we had a module on it in first year, and I really enjoyed it. And I was chatting about it with classmates, and one of the girls in my class, her dad was running a club at West of Scotland. He was running a women's team, and she said you should go along and try it. And she played volleyball. She wasn't a rugby player. So I roped in two friends to come along, and we went up to West of Scotland and Milngavie. And little did I know then, it was the Scottish and British Lion great Sandy Carmichael who was the coach at West of Scotland. And he was a very early advocate for women's rugby. And in particular, you needed those allies when rugby was getting started out. And I just got hooked into that. It was a bit of a logistical challenge out to Milngavie, not having a car initially, and very much relying on teammates getting around the country to play fixtures. But it was right at the starting point of women's rugby in Scotland. You'll hear a bit in the press, hopefully, over the next few weeks and months about the sort of the anniversaries of women's rugby in Scotland, and us hosted a World Cup in 94. So it was that 93-94 period where the club game was really evolving, and it was a great time to be involved.
Yeah, and sorry, on you go, on you go.
Well, I was just going to say it was a fabulous time because the sport was growing, but it was also quite hard because there was no infrastructure,
Yeah,
there was no real understanding of women's rugby. So although it was exciting from a playing perspective, there was a lot of barriers, a lot of glass ceilings that continually needed pushing through to allow us to play. Access to pitches and changing rooms, facilities, referees, everything that you need to play. Team sports was a bit of a conversation, and there were certain clubs that were better at supporting the game than others.
yeah. I think as well, like when you think about that sort of time, it does seem like for me personally, it seems like a long time ago, but because it was 10 years before I was even born, but the game wasn't really the game wasn't even, it was sort of evolving into the professional state, the men's game at that point as
Yeah.
well. So rugby as a whole was just a grassroots sport, and
Mhm.
when you've not got the sort of a big funding or big multinational businesses getting involved in it like it is at the stage now, the funding is very different, and clubs, I guess 30 years ago, the mindset as well as their priorities are different, they see things differently. So yeah, like a really tough time but important time for women's rugby coming through.
Yeah, it was, and I was fortunate or privileged to be the first ever women's rugby development officer in Scotland as well, and having the opportunity to go out and inspire and get young girls involved in sport was fabulous in terms of a career progression for me, but also because I had such a passion for the game. So I was surrounding myself and immersed myself in rugby, whether I was playing it, coaching it, or working in it. So it was a great time to be involved. And what I think we're seeing now is really that tipping point of where we've got the media coverage and support of the sport, and we've got the infrastructure in place to allow the development. We've got the home unions investing in professionalism, in all the support that comes around with that. And you're seeing, fantastic performance from Scotland at the weekend to beat England and to beat Wales. I think we're going to have to do that bit again. Can't say beat England. You're going to have to edit
We'll
that
see.
bit.
Well, we'll give it a few weeks. See if Scotland
I
can get a
know,
result.
yeah, to beat Wales in Wales, it was the first time we've beaten Wales in Wales since 2004. So we're seeing the performances coming out on the pitch as well.
Yeah, and yeah, I think it's either the 20 or 25th anniversary this year of the Women's Premiership in Scotland as well. So, or maybe 30th. I might be wrong.
It was last year was the 30th international, and this year's 30 years since we hosted the first World Cup. So we've had a league infrastructure for that period of time as well.
There you go. Yeah, and I believe at the moment it's one of the fastest growing team sports as well in across the whole of the UK is women's rugby. So it's really on sort of a good trend, and it's brilliant to see because I think it's also pushing the men's game as well to see like we're able to make such big improvements and try things differently here. What are you doing to do the same thing, to challenge those old sort of stereotypes, old sort of rules in the game? How can we progress it further? So yeah, it's really great. I think coming back to you sort of starting rugby, how was that balancing when you made that step to playing international? Obviously it was a different sort of setup, still amateur at that point, but what was that like balancing playing internationally, training as well as training with your club and holding a job at the same time, or studying as well?
Yeah, I think it was quite difficult because we were wanting to embrace being professional athletes without that professional support. So we were working full time, but then we were having to do all our training in the evenings, and all our recovery. You were finishing a match, potentially an international match on a Sunday afternoon, having to travel back up from England or Wales and then be at your desk or in your day job on a Monday morning. So the rest and recovery wasn't there. But we were also, you'll hear a lot of people talking about the sacrifices that they will make to perform internationally in any sport. And really it was the different things that you had to prioritise and sacrifice, because you were fitting everything into your downtime or your leisure time. That was where you had to put all your rugby training, your skill development and your fitness and everything into that window. So there wasn't much else that you could fit in. You would have, I guess, challenges around commitment to family events, weddings, christenings, all those types of things, but also then how you wanted to prioritise your own performance. So that's really what had to come first.
Yeah. And what was your support network like when you were playing at this level? Was it a lot just friends and family, or was there more that the sort of union could offer, whether it was through coaches or extra support, or was it really just you're out on your own, you come together, train, play, and do your best?
There was the friends and family element of it. My parents were hugely supportive, and in those early days, and you're also starting out in your career as well. There was a bit of financial support that was needed because we often paid our own travel for internationals, or for our own strips and resources. Which, when I mentioned that to somebody recently, it was just like mind blown. You're like, really, that can't be true, but it was, and that's what it takes sometimes to start out in a new sport. The clubs were supportive to a certain extent, where they could be, and at the time we didn't have support from the Scottish Rugby Union. We had what was the Scottish Women's Rugby Union, which was an affiliate volunteer governing body, that had a relationship with the SRU, but it wasn't fully integrated into it. So there was limited elements of support. That evolved over time. It also evolved with what we saw in Scotland and across the UK was the introduction of the National Lottery to support sport and funding, initially in facilities and then in junior groups and individual athlete support. So that came in around physio support and some things later on. But at the very beginning, it was really self-led, and your friends and families that supported that.
Wow, that's amazing to hear. I didn't know that it was sort of your union was separate to the SRU, and it wasn't sort of encompassed in the whole body. It just shows the sort of divide between men's and women's rugby at that point, doesn't it? In the sort of mindset.
Yes, it was. I guess in order to progress the sport, there needed governance and an organisation, and that wasn't integrated into the SRU at that time. There wasn't a willingness to have it, and that took a while to come. But some very, enthusiastic, strong-willed women put together a committee and an infrastructure to support the growing of the game very much in the early days. And it wouldn't have grown without that, because it needed volunteers, it needed the competitions infrastructure, it needed rules and regulations, and all that was provided by some very committed volunteers, to be honest.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear. It's interesting, and I guess it's good to see how far we've come from that and how integrated the whole system
Yep.
sort of is now. But also, there's still steps to go. But it is, clubs now have sort of a thriving men's and women's sections in multiple places. But the club I play at Hillhead Jordan Hill in Glasgow as well. The women's team's in the Premiership, the men's team's National Free, and it's like the women's team they've always got easy can make a twos team at the weekend. The men's are like trying to struggle, bring some old boys down. So, and that's not just where at our club, that's situation in other places. So it's so good to see sort of an incorporated men's and women's sections. I think as well, you said about the National Lottery funding. I find it really interesting looking back at Olympic medal tables for GB, because you always think GB have been, top of the pile. And then you go before like the 90s and it's like one or two gold medals at each Olympics. It's a bit crazy to hear. So yeah, such a big impact on sport, not just at Olympic level, but all through different levels
Yeah.
as well. Obviously now you're working in, or you spent time as well working in sports development and a lot of business work and leadership work now as well. That rugby culture with your national team must have been quite important. And obviously you say about the support network, you need to be there for each other. So did you do any work that maybe wouldn't have been classified, but looking back on it now, it really helped develop your culture, develop you guys as a team, bring you guys closer together? Were there any sort of things you did or ways of working that help to develop and foster that sense of team culture?
I think generally the sport of rugby epitomises team sport. It really creates a very strong culture within the team and within the club. So you've got that basis, and also the fact that there really is a role for everybody in rugby. Your size, your shape, there's something for you to do on the pitch, which will impact on the performance of the team. Everybody's got their role. And we see, I guess, from a very basic level, the diversity of inclusion happening all around the rugby team, and helps supports the culture of it. We're not going to win the line out if the hooker doesn't get it right. We're not going to, capture the ball back if the lifters and the jumper don't manage to have that execution at the line. So there's a role for everybody to play, which really supports everybody to understand individuals' values. I think from a team perspective, that was very strong within my first team at West of Scotland. When I moved to play with Murrayfield Wanderers in Edinburgh, we had a very performance-focused mindset. We had a really unique group of players that wanted to play and perform and do the best that they could be. So that sort of drove the extra training sessions. It drove extra, self-funded trips to performance camps over, the New Year period, like La Santa, and we would do things like that ourselves because we really just wanted to be the best that we could, roping in different coaches to help us with our skills or friends to help us with our strength and conditioning. So we created that performance mindset and that culture within the club. And that carried on for many years, all the way through our international playing days, and it really transitioned from club into international and vice versa. So really supported that culture of self-improvement and performance.
Yeah, nice. That's good to hear. And it's sort of when you've not got that level of support and funding, I guess it is your willingness, and you've got to sort of double down on it if you really want it. You've got to prove even harder that you want to go for it and do these extra things. Did you have maybe sort of any negative experiences or cultures where you didn't quite enjoy, you didn't quite get on well, things weren't quite settling well, that you realized maybe I'm not performing or the team aren't performing at their best here? And if you can think of an experience like that, can you put your finger on why that was the case, why it was, and maybe how you learned from that?
I guess personally, I quite like, I foster a feedback culture in work and in sport, in my coaching. And sometimes within the feedback approach that we had varying degrees of coach support, and we weren't always getting the specific feedback we needed to progress. I mean, we're talking, when you're talking internationally, it's quite a competitive environment. Coaching women is different to coaching men. You're looking for the feedback that's going to make you the next best player. We didn't have the analysis that we would probably have wanted to go around our own individual performances. So that could be quite subjective. And that was a difficult, I guess, environment or culture to be in, because it was he said, she said, rather than actually going maybe on some of the evidence that the players and the girls have got now. They've got very strong physiological support and strength and conditioning support, which allows them to look at their individual personal performances, and then they have the analysis that will allow them to look at their team skills and decision making performances from that perspective. So I think I would have personally enjoyed an environment or a culture where we had more open and honest and data driven feedback, and that would have supported our performances.
That's interesting to hear, and yeah, it's good to hear. And I guess it's that idea of being able to take your personal self and whoever you're talking about out of the situation and looking at it from that analytical, logical point of view, where we're not focusing on the person that made the pass, but what the decision was made, whether that's what we agreed to do, whether that's what we want to do, and yeah, that less sort of focus on that personal who's at fault, who did good
Yeah.
here, and how are we doing it, how can we do it better as a team. So yeah, it's interesting to hear. And I think the analytical sort of side, video analysis, is something that teams right down to amateur level can get a hold of now and can involve in their coaching and performance. So a key part, I guess, as you say, to be able to develop well.
Largely, rugby, though, and the teams I was involved in, was a very positive culture because of the value that you had in all the individual players. You understood the role that they played, the reliance that you had on them. In order for you to succeed, you needed other people to do their positions effectively. So there was a real camaraderie and a real desire for everybody to improve, everybody to be fitter, everybody to be faster, stronger, to do the best that they could do, because that was going to impact on your own performance. And that ethos and culture within the team was very strong. I think the other piece within rugby and the rugby cultures that I really enjoyed was the respect for the values of the game, respect for the values of sport. And I definitely had that within rugby, but also within in my professional world, that the fact that everything, all the life lessons that you can learn from sport and the impact it can have on you as individuals was so strong.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, and it sort of leads nicely on to the next bit as well. This respect for values and I guess what the right thing is to do, and how you incorporate that from a sporting position where you're performing and to performing in your role and your work. So you said a bit before about how you got into the sort of sports development, but did that really ignite from being young, being involved in sport, and then just wanting to continue with that?
Yeah, so I think you want to be in it. And again, you mentioned age earlier on, but when I was coming out of school, there was very few jobs within a sporting career. It was really sports development or health and fitness or PE teaching. And out of those sort of strands, I was very much of that. I want people to choose to come along. So I'm looking at community sport and sports development. Um, And that's really what drove my initial interest. And I also think then, and it's probably the same now, that once you get your first job and you get experience in that job, it opens up doors to apply for the next job. And that can dictate quite a few stages within your career. So I went to work in social inclusion and areas of deprivation, using sport for change. And I was really passionate about that for my first two jobs. Then, as I say, I got the opportunity to work in rugby development. And who wouldn't want to do that when you were a rugby player? And then active schools and young people was a growing, starting out as being a big national project. So I wanted a piece of that action. And then the 2012 Olympics was coming around, and I wanted the opportunity to work in England with that growing, and a chance to work for a hugely passionate charity in the Youth Sport Trust. So your next stages in your career, to a certain extent, are dictated by the experience that you get. And that also followed on into coming back up to work in Scotland in the coach development team, because the programme I came to work on in that, which you'll have heard of, was Positive Coaching Scotland, which was very much about how do we look at the broader impact that sport can have on young people. How can we look at the values that come within sport, the life lessons, the opportunities that young people can have through sport, that actually the performance and the sport are, regardless of the performance of the sport they're involved in, we're going to see this impact on young people as a result of their involvement in sport. So it was a very important part of my decision to come back and work in Sport Scotland.
Yeah. And I guess everything you've described describes quite well Sport Scotland's approach, which is their Sport for Life motto, where you're looking at sport for all ages, but not just as a high performance, as you say, sort of you've got to perform the best at all times, but how can sport be a positive and helpful and beneficial experience for everyone throughout their life as part of their lifestyle. So whether it is as simple as active travel, or you're a key part of a team that's performing well, how is everyone involved in sport? And the experiences you've gone through have sort of lead you to that position really nicely, as you say, through those doors. I think I'd like to ask a wee bit more about your current role, which is within sort of business consultancy, leadership, those sort of ideas. So could you just sort of explain, I guess, what your day-to-day, even though it might be a bit different, or week-to-week, sort of looks like, and how you're involved with developing leaders?
So my last 10 years at Sport Scotland was leading the coach development team, which I mentioned earlier. And that was a natural progression into leadership development and executive coaching, because I had the opportunity to run in the leadership programmes that Sport Scotland provided for the Scottish sporting system. And I just decided I wanted to spend more time in that space, and my skill level and my experience in there was evolving, and I wanted to spend more time doing that. So now I work for myself. My company is called Bespoke Consulting. And that really is because of the ethos I have in terms of working with my clients. It's very much about how do I understand their needs and how can I support and serve them as individuals to become better at their job, or how they can become more effective as teams and organisations to reach their own objectives and their own goals. So as you alluded to, no week's the same, no day's the same. I enjoy still working within sport and within the public sector and the third sector. Most of my clients come, in fact, all of my clients come from personal recommendations or connections, which really means that we explore, first of all, how or if we work well together, and if I can support them in any different ways around leadership or personal effectiveness.
Excellent. So you've given a good overview there of sort of who you're involved in, and that initial connection through those either personal relationships or connections, which I guess means you need to do a good job if you want to stay in this role.
Absolutely, yeah. If you want to get invited back.
Yeah, definitely. When you get that sort of initial contact and you're speaking with a client, whether it be maybe a small group of people or an individual, how do you go about understanding their position, understanding what they want, where they're at with their business, whether it's going well, whether things are going poorly? How do you get a good grip of their situation?
Good question, actually. It very much is seek first to understand. So a lot of listening. What's going on for them? What are they trying to achieve? Trying to get a feel for their business and for their organisations, particularly if it's somebody new or it's a different sector. I've got a generally healthy fascination in human behaviour. So I'm always interested in hearing and seeing how different people operate and how different companies operate. I've done some work in the drinks industry, I've done some work in oil and gas, which are very, very different and also very different to sport. And community sports. So I really spend a lot of time getting to know what the challenges they're facing, the impact that has on their organisation, the impact it will have on um, the people involved in their organisation, whether it be from a performance perspective, a morale element, or even that personal development and self improvement side of things. Where do the individuals want to go? So it's a lot of listening and hearing about where they're at in order to plan a way forward with them that's going to support them the best way it can.
And as you said, working in different sort of sectors, does that require a strong understanding of the sort of modern or the current climate of that sector? So, for example, if it's oil and gas, a few years ago when the price of a barrel drops and companies are all getting worried and things like that, people are getting laid off. Or if it's the drinks industry, sort of what are the problems with recent movements and shipping costs and things like that? Do you need to have a strong understanding of a sector, or does it sort of depend on the company you're working with?
I like to get an understanding of it. I think when people are immersed in the sector, they have a depth of knowledge that I would never have, but I do like to do a bit of research and understanding. And I then generally have picked up themes of work or patterns of behaviour that you will see in some other industries as well. So there's nothing funnier than folk, as they say, particularly in Scotland. You'll see different patterns of behaviour coming up in the same ways as you do, but in different sectors. So I think having a bit of an understanding is useful, but not too much of an in depth that you can get your head into the weeds. It's good to have an overview and bring things from other sectors in as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's something my mum always says, where like history repeats itself. So human behavior doesn't really change. It's just the context of a situation that it's in that is the difference.
Yeah.
Um, Once you've got that sort of understanding, you've listened, you maybe get the problems, you not understand where they want to get to. How do you decide the best route of achieving that? Obviously, you've got thing or methods that you've got understanding of, you've got learning of, and you're able to implement. But how do you decide the best route going forward?
I think it is very individual to that client, and there will be some things that we can bring in that we've used before or that I've used before. It's really important that you don't start cookie cuttering solutions for organisations, because it really has to suit them. For in order to be fully effective, it really has to suit them. I think it depends on where they are on their own journey. I'm a strong advocate of increasing self-awareness of individuals and the awareness that they have of their behaviours on others. And I know when we first met, we did some work around psychometrics with when you were in the young people sport panel, and the opportunity to look at how do you use psychometrics in that learning journey. So I do use some different tools. I also look at what we have out there in terms of what's the best practice in different areas. Are they going through a period of change? Are they looking at project management elements? Is it communication that's and collaboration that might be holding them back? So I did a piece of work for a client last year, which I absolutely loved. We designed a whole year of training with them. We did everything from psychometrics to 360s. And then we had a journey which allowed us to look at some theory, apply that theory, apply it in the context of their organisation, and then take time to reflect on it afterwards. So we had a regular drumbeat of interactions that meant that we could come back together. I'm not a massive fan of a one-stop shop. I think, if you go in once and come back out, you're not really giving the individual or the organisation a real chance to change and develop.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for that. And it's sort of, I was going to ask about that, about the sort of how regular you have that contact with the people you're working with. I know speaking to sports psychologists, they always say sort of the dream is to be integrated and involved in a club or in a team, so that you're not just coming in sort of saying your bit and then removed, and all that work that you're trying to do isn't taken on board and becomes part of the process or the culture of the team. Whereas when you're integrated, that's how things are done, and you can really leave your footprint on that. So what is that sort of, how regular are you meeting with with clients? Does it depend on their situation? Is there sort of a base that you like to get to? And when do you sort of agree, right, we've got what we wanted to achieve from this?
Yeah. So I think it depends on the context. If I was working with a coaching client and it was a one-to-one coaching relationship, um, then it would be ideal to see them every 3 to 6 weeks. So monthly is a good pattern where it gives the opportunity for reflection, for application, and to take forward some of the actions that you might discuss and that your client might take forward in order to progressing what their individual goals are that they've set out. If you're working within an organisational effectiveness and a team development setting, then again, meeting them regularly depends on the learning and development might have a concentrated period of time, and then you might have an opportunity to apply the learning and then come back to it. So learning can take on many guises, and the opportunity to have a focused period of time which is more theory based, and then a break from that is also beneficial. So the session the program I put together, for example, last year, that also was every 4 to 6 weeks, but it was interspersed with workshops and learning and coaching opportunities. So it was very much a learning journey that we went on.
Excellent, good stuff. And you've spoken a wee bit sort of about the methods that you do. Obviously, we did our sort of psychometric stuff and the insights. So I really enjoyed that session. I know, I mean, having an interest in psychology, I was sort of buzzing to hear about it and to learn about it and to see a different approach from things. Whereas some people maybe they just see us as another workshop exercise that we've got to do. You know, this is where you write it up. So before we come on to the methods, how do you sort of get that excitement from people if they're maybe not quite involved in it? If you're working with a larger corporation, a larger group of people that have sort of been encouraged to get involved in this, how do you make it exciting? How do you get them like, guys, you can get better from this?
I think you need to understand their driver, their hook. So what's in it for them? Why are they there? And we're fortunate, particularly in sport, most people that come to any workshop or any learning opportunity, they are ready to learn. They're very enthusiastic. They're very engaged. They want to do the best for themselves. They understand how we're not the finished article, that self-improvement, whether in sport or whether in professionally, needs some nurturing, it needs some time and attention. So I'm very fortunate that vast majority of people that I work with are coming into that learning environment with a positive approach and engaged to learn.
Good stuff. Excellent. And then moving on to these sort of methods, if we start with insights, I guess, could you sort of explain what insights is, how you like carry it out, and then the benefits of performing an insight session with a group?
So Insights is a psychometric profiling tool, which is a preference-based questionnaire, primarily developed to look at increasing your self-awareness and then your awareness of how you behave and how that impacts on others. It's developed on the psychology of Dr. Carl Jung, so from the 19th century, and it's very, very robust. It's very accurate. It's based on a four-color energy model, which makes it easy to understand and then easy to remember. And if you think of things that are easy to understand and easy to remember, then you've got a higher chance of applying them into your work context, of creating a common language in your team, in your sports team. It's used a lot in sports, or in your professional organisation. There's another psychometric that I use as well called Spotlight, which was developed through Allegiance and some of the psychologists from the English Institute of Sport. And it has two frameworks. It's also a preference-based tool, but it has two frameworks, and a behavioural style framework and a mindset framework. So it's getting another depth of understanding of how you like to operate. And then knowing where we are and understanding where we are, helps support us know where we want to get to. And being able to adapt and change, if anything, the last 4 years has taught us is adaptability, and our ability to change and perform in different circumstances and different environments is it's a super skill. We have to be able to do that in order to succeed. And, psychometric tools are, they're not the golden bullet. They are a lens to look at things through. They accelerate our understanding of self and others, which means we can move through a journey a wee bit quicker. And it can give us a foundation to have different either coaching conversations or development conversations on. But it's not, it's not the be all and or end all for all development, but it is very much a framework that you can work from.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and those color things, as you say, being able to sort of visualize clearly the different areas of it, so you can build up that picture for everyone to understand quite easily. It reminded me of it puts your personality types in a way into different sections of how you work and things like that.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a situation where you maybe worked with a group and you found, a vast majority are working in maybe sort of they could be the red color or the yellow color or something like that, or you're lacking certain characteristics and traits for a certain area, and then from that you've got to say, well, either we look at getting people on board or we look at adapting how we're working. How do you deal with maybe sort of an imbalance in results?
It's very much because we're measuring preference, not competence, with insights in particular, if we use that as the conversation, because it's a preference, not a competence. It's the starting point is really increasing their awareness of some of the preferred behaviours that they don't see within their team. Most of the organisations I work with aren't going to be able to have the flexibility to go out and recruit someone. And insights I wouldn't use for that as a tool for that anyway. And then saying, well, where are we not seeing these behaviours? What's the consequences of that within our team? And where do we need to be talking insights about dialing up or dialing down? Where do we need to dial into those energies a bit more? So increasing the awareness of the behaviours associated with those colours is the first point. And then where and in what situations do we see as having too much of it or too little of it? And then what are the impact? What's the consequences of that within our organisation or many teams? And then, there will be sub-conversations around that. Well, what's the impact for our communication? What's the impact on our decision-making? What's the impact on our collaboration and our work with partners? So you can look at different elements of the organisational effectiveness through the lens of insights and through the colours. And you can do that with the majority of the psychometrics that will be used in bigger organisations or in any organisation.
Just for like an example, so say you do the sort of the insights questionnaire, you come up with a color blue, for example. What are some of those things that blue is saying? What is an example of someone who's showing up as a color blue?
So I'm gonna check you there in your language, because it's something that can happen in organisations. We lead with the cool blue energy. We're a blend of all four colours, and it's our preference to use them in the order that we use them. So somebody and a team that has a lower level of cool blue energy, they might lack attention to detail, attention to processes. The emphasis they have on data and detail and evidence will be less. Somebody that leads with cool blue energy has a preference for reflection and introversion ways of operating. So we often talk about people that lead with cool blue as if they're in a time zone, they're in the past, because they're looking at the history, they're looking at the evidence that gives them a trend that supports them to make a decision or to communicate in a particular way. So we would need to make sure that attention was paid to those behaviours by somebody else in the team at different times.
Excellent, good stuff. Thanks for keeping me clear with that as well.
Yeah,
With
so
my
I think you need a wee refresh, George.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a few years. It would be good to go over it again. But yeah, I think that gives a really sort of clear example of how those different behaviors can arise in a company and then or a business, and how to work around them. Another one of a I see you've been sort of involved in or got a good understanding of is neuro-linguistic programming. So could you sort of explain what that is? Because I've not got much of an idea. I tried to read up a bit about it before, but could you explain sort of what that is and how it's involved in your work?
Yeah, so NLP, neuro linguistic programming, is really the neuro, the brain, linking with the language and the words. And then the programming is our patterns of behavior. So you put all those three together, you can look at how your beliefs and your thoughts link into your language and your actions, and how you're going to operate, and then how you're going to make that a pattern, or how that's going to drive your behavior. So it was developed a long time ago. I want to try and put a number on it, but it's used across the world in terms of how we can enhance and improve our own personal effectiveness. And it will be used in different areas, obviously with linguistics and the brain, very much around communication. So NLP techniques can help people overcome lots of different communication challenges. It can help them overcome limiting beliefs, and because the way that they think, they can operate or they can perform, impacts on their actions. So if they can have a belief change, it can very much impact on their performance, and that enhancement, that using NLP really will help you offer strategies and develop techniques to enhance your own individual performance. So there's a whole range of tools and techniques within NLP, depending on what the individual or the client needs, and helps really individuals primarily, and then teams, unleash their own potential and really get underneath their own potential.
Have you got an example of a technique that you might use that would be related to NLP?
Oh, you put me on the spot there. So, an example of a technique, perceptual positions. So, this is where you will look at a situation or a relationship, particularly strong within relationship situations, and you look at it in the first person, in yourself. You'll then use different language and different questioning techniques to look at it within the second person, and then you'll take that helicopter view to look at the relationship together. It can bring forward some things around a relationship or an interaction that neither party have had thought about it from that perspective before. It can help you explore the different perceptions, and then break down some relationship challenges, or even just a situation or context that needs attention between two individuals. So it's called perceptual positions, and you look at it through three different positions. And throughout, when you move from different positions, you go through a process of breaking state, so that when you really get into the different position two or position three, you're looking at it from a fresh new perspective.
Excellent, good stuff. I won't challenge you with finding any
No,
more, but
no, that's
that's
a
a
good one. It's one that I use a
yeah,
lot.
that's a really good example, and I guess something that people can do just themselves sometimes of that self awareness of understanding how others. We say it from a young age, but how would someone else feel if you did that, or would you want someone to do that for you? Which is, I guess, sort of a very basic level of that idea of taking yourself out of that first person view all the time and seeing it from an overarching perspective.
And we do that a lot as well with insights, in terms of one of the big pillars of insights or any psychometric is exploring perception. So what's your perception of that situation? What somebody else's perception could be, and what are the actions or the decisions that you make based on your perception. And perception is key in any self development journey, because in order for you to really understand how other people see you and you to connect effectively with them, you really need to understand yourself. Perception also can't be switched off, and it runs from a very, very early age. we talked earlier on about me starting out, and my perception was shaped by the community, by the school, by my family, and that evolves through the experiences and the interactions that I have of sport that then I take on into, into my career in sport playing and also professionally.
Final sort of bit, I guess, about NLP as well is obviously about linguistic part of the first thing we think about when we think about linguistics and language is what we say, what we speak, what we write, what we hear. Does it include our body language and how we interact with others as well through what we do with our body?
Yeah, very much so. It looks at so one of the key elements within NLP is how do you make connections, how do you build rapport, how are you going to do that from a mirroring perspective? Are you going to mirror and take on some of the body language and behaviours of others? And also when you're looking at making connections and effective relationships, whether it's through a psychometric or through NLP, so our body language and our verbal style and our tone, they're like road signals. They're giving us information. So they're either maybe giving us a warning, or they're giving us additional information that we can take on board in order to connect more effectively.
So thank you so much for joining me today, Beth. We've covered a good amount, probably quite wide, maybe not too deep, but hopefully lots of examples and ideas that people can get about sort of the work you do and also your past experience. The last section we really touched on the methods in which you practice and get this idea of people to understand their self and this whole idea of self-awareness and perception. So for someone that's listening to this that is maybe involved in a leadership position, whether it's coaching or even playing or maybe a teacher or something like that, what's something that they can do quite easily by themselves to help develop that self-awareness, whether it's sort of a small activity or a daily thing that they could do to help develop their self-awareness?
I, th- I think for me the clue is in the title. It's be self-aware. So be aware of your own patterns of behaviour. Be aware of when you take a particular course of action. Reflect on how you adapt in different situations or how you perform in different situations. And if the best way for you to learn is to write things down or note things down and just look for the patterns and look for any recurring themes that you think that might need a bit of attention or that might need a bit more focus on. And also open up the avenues of feedback. I'm a massive fan of feedback. So have a conversation with those that you're working with, those that you're playing with, people that you're studying with, that they will see you, and that brings in perception and perspective. They will see you in a different situation or a different light. So open up that avenue of conversation and feedback with those around you that you're working with on a more regular basis. Say, look, I'm working on this. Give me some feedback. And start that. Feedback is a gift, as they say. Start that dialogue really early.
Yeah, good stuff. I think that's something, especially in young people, that you can have this worry constantly about what other people are thinking of you, and it gets to a point where you've just got to go, well, I don't care what other people think of you, but that's maybe not the healthy approach. It's having that positive and an honest, I guess, understanding of what the people who are close to you and important to you think of you.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I hadn't thought about it from that side of things. I guess with that, I would say when you're having a feedback conversation, be as specific as you can. I'm seeing this behavior in you, and this is the impact that I saw. And then, next time it would be really good if you did this or you did that. There's a model in feedback which we introduced really early called the AID model. This is the action that you did, or this is a behavior that you did, this is the impact it had, and do differently next time would be this. Whereas it's a very straightforward model which starts people thinking about giving and receiving feedback and creating, you talked earlier also about culture, creating a culture where feedback is it is the norm, it's the way that you operate, it's the way that you do things. And then it will become very, very easy for people to adopt that and get right in there. And it will really accelerate your self-awareness because it's also the awareness of others around you.
Awesome. Amazing. We've sort of come full circle. That's worked out quite nicely. Well, look, Beth, I'd like to say a huge thank you for your time today, for sort of the insight you've given from an international rugby career, sort of many years ago, to how it's led to working in some really interesting roles and positions right now. And I think the insight you've given into insights and sort of the self awareness stuff I found really interesting. So I hope listeners have too. So yeah, thank you again.
Thanks very much, George. Pleasure.